So sometimes I'll be coming out of the house and I'll have my hands full and I'll push the screen door open with my back and just kind of slide out the door. And then the handle hooks on these two little belt loops and then I'm stuck on the door. Does that happen to anybody else? Just me? Okay then, on with the show. This week I had a lot of questions about glass cutters and cutting glass, so I thought that I'd do a quick video just on the basics of cutting glass. So I'll talk a little bit about the glass cutters first. Most of us are familiar with just a department store glass cutter that has that ball at one end and these little notches. These are fairly inexpensive and they're good for starting out cutting glass, but they're not going to last you for a long time. They have a steel wheel, so that dulls fairly quickly. I keep them on hand for if I have a broken piece in a panel and I have to break that piece out and I don't want to damage my cutter wheel on my good cutters, so I'll use one of these instead. Stained glass cutters are actually a carbide wheel, so that's going to last a lot longer. They have a reservoir for oil. I usually don't use the reservoir because sometimes it can leak out all over my project, so I just oil the wheel on a per project basis. That helps lubricate the wheel and make sure that you're getting a nice clean score line. There's different shapes to all the glass cutters depending on your preference. So this one would be held kind of like a pencil and you would score across the glass. And it's really what's most comfortable for your own hand. The next one that I really like using is called a Thomas grip or a saddle, where there's a little spot here for your hand to go into. That lets you use more strength from your hand rather than just your fingers when you're making that score line. And it just makes for a nice even score line so that you get a nice clean break. Another kind that I have used before is what's called a comfort grip, and it actually can rearrange depending on the size of your hand. If you've got small hands like me, you can set up this little paddle so that it's at the lowest part, and if you have a little bit larger hands, you can rearrange these and flip it around so that the grip is up higher so that it fits your hand so that it's most comfortable for your hand. The last kind is the pistol grip, and that's most comfortable for people who have problems with their wrist, arthritis in their hands. It lets the strength come more from your arm than from your wrist. So when you're cutting with this one, it just sits nicely in your hand like that, and then you can press down and maneuver your arm as you're cutting your glass. Let's talk about score lines. So what's happening when we're scoring glass, the cutter wheel is shaped into a point. So when it's run over the surface of the glass, it's basically making a weakness in the glass. So that's why when you cut a curve, you can force the glass to break along that weakness. The glass is going to break in whatever the easiest way is. So if there's a really complex curve, sometimes it'll shoot off in a different direction because that's easier than following that score line. But we'll talk about that after. When you're scoring the glass, you're going to only want to score it once, because if you go back over top of the score line a bunch of times, it's going to dull your cutter head, and that'll wear out that cutter wheel a lot quicker. So the carbide wheels, they should last for anywhere from 3 to 5 years if you're treating them properly and if you're not going back over top of other score lines. Some other tips for your score line is to make sure that your cutter wheel is held right at a 90-degree angle. When you start tilting from side to side, the score line, you'll end up with the break where it doesn't break nicely down the middle of the glass. It'll break kind of off to an angle, and you'll end up with sharp edges on the piece of glass when they break. So you'll want to make sure that when you're scoring, you're not letting the cutter tilt to either side. For me personally, the best way that I find to have a good score line is to keep even pressure for the entire score line. So I like to cut across in front of me rather than cutting away from me, where at the far side of the glass, I'm going to have less pressure on the glass. My score line at the end might not be as clear as the score line when I first started. So I like to cut where I have a firm amount of pressure all the way across the piece of glass. The cutter wheel is shaped like a V. So basically what it's doing is it's creating a weakness in the glass. It's kind of scratching the surface of the glass and making that little V shape right in the glass, and that's where the glass is going to break. It's kind of like a Kit Kat bar. When you have that little groove down the center of the Kit Kat and you can break the two pieces apart, that's basically what the glass is doing. So once we have a score line on our glass, we have a couple of options to actually break the glass. First option, we can use just our hands. And we're gonna break it just like that Kit Kat bar where we're gonna snap it apart. The pressure at the bottom of the score line is going to separate where that weakness in the glass is, and then it'll snap apart following that score line. So if you put your thumbs on either side of the break and push down, and you put your fingers underneath so that you're pressing up, it'll just break apart. Another option that we have is a tool called running pliers. They're shaped in the same way that our hands would be, where pressure would be happening up from the bottom and pulling down at the sides. So they're kind of shaped in a sad face, where in the middle here it's going to press up, and at the sides it's going to press down. We always start at the side where we finished off the edge of the glass because the score line runs right to the edge. On the other side where we started, quite often you won't start the score line right at the very edge of the glass. It just makes it a little bit harder to start the score line. There's this little line in the middle that shows that you're centered. You line that up with the score line, and then it breaks. This is a nice controlled way to break glass. This is probably my favorite way of breaking, just because there's a lot more control than just breaking with your hands. Sometimes we have a piece of glass that we need to cut that's thinner than what the running pliers will allow for width, because they don't have enough room to press down on either side of the score line. The tool we would use in that instance is called a Groser Plier, and it's shaped like half of these. So they have this curved piece underneath where under the score line that would be pressing up under, and then at the top this sits flat against the glass so that we can pull the glass that way. So if you have the two sets of pliers like this and they are on either side of the score line, it's just like the full set of the running pliers. So when we have glass like that we have to break, we would line up the pliers just alongside the edge of the score line and then press up and pull them apart. Cutting curves can be a sticky point with a lot of people. Inside curves are a little bit more tricky because glass is going to want to break straight. It doesn't want to break in a sharp curve. So when you're breaking glass out of an inside curve, it's easiest to make a series of small crescents out of the inside of your cut to reach that inside curve that you're looking for. So if my curve was really tight and I wanted this part to be broken out, if I were to just break this out right now, this score line probably wouldn't be able to handle the tightness of this curve, and it would break straight out across my piece, which would be okay if I wanted this piece for my project, but not so great if I wanted this piece for my project. So instead of starting with that break, I would start and make a series of shallow little crescents, and then I can break all of those individually, and then it'll be easier to break my bigger crescent. So you can see that score line starting, and it breaks. There we go. So hopefully I've given you a few pointers that you can use to improve your cutting skills, or maybe you were just curious about how glass cutting works. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please post in the comments below and let me know. And make sure to subscribe to my channel to see more tips, tricks, and tutorials, as well as being first to see giveaways and new collection releases. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.